But right now is about right now.
The Plan B, Ohio State Buckeyes.
Give everything you got in your heart to this place.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Rushing the Field, presented by Xfinity. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach. And Joshua, it was an eventful week one. Like, we talked about this going into the week, that we were so excited for all of these meaningful games. Well, we got some meaningful results and people are still overreacting to them.
Well, the overreactions, as we always say, our favorite part of the early part of college football. This is what fans want, though. We want things to cling on to. We want to see great matchups. We want to learn things about teams, maybe see some underwhelming performances or maybe some teams that overperform early on. So super exciting. We're going to look back at a little bit of it. And then, of course, we got the previews for this week. But I couldn't have been happier with what we got to see in week one.
Absolutely. And we had to record LSU Clemson was still going on. So we're going to catch up on our thoughts on LSU winning that game. We'll get to the Sunday night and Monday games too, because I think we have some thoughts on Bill Belichick and his performance. But we're going to start with our news and notes segment. We'll run through a couple of items before we get to the watch back, which is what we're going to call our segment, kind of looking back, one last thought on the weekend that was. Couple quick news and notes. Ohio State is the new number one team in the country. I had a piece up on NBCSports.com explaining why that was the correct choice after the win over Texas. Another quick note, Kalen DeBoer has been answering questions about the lack of effort, the lack of urgency, and really everything else that was on display in the loss against Florida State. Kalen DeBoer said, quote, "My message is that to our team is that I think we have a good football team that can do some big things still this year. We've got to prove it. We've got to do it." And he says that he is going to just harp on effort and urgency and the things that we did not see in that game. And Joshua, I keep thinking about what you were talking about over the weekend when we talked about this. It's not a talent question. And first of all, Alabama has a lot of talent. But this is about like when you step on the field and you think you're going to win the game, and just preparation, not believing after one drive that the game is over, which we heard from Ty Simpson, the quarterback, that he felt that way, that the team felt that way. So that's what I think I'm most interested to see moving forward is like, do they look different? Does it feel different when they're on the field?
To have a conversation about effort and energy and the desire to play the game after week one, I think is a really rough spot to be in. And again, like no team is out of it, a power four team at least after week one, right? Like you lose the game, you still got everything in front of you. But those are things that should be non-negotiables. Those don't have to be discussed. You go out there because you love the game, you're going to give it everything you got because you never know when your last play is going to happen. I can remember back in 2012, after our season, Urban Meyer went down to the national championship game between Alabama and Notre Dame. And he sent out a big group text and said that we were not to that standard. We weren't as good as Alabama and we weren't championship level. And the reason was because he watched a defensive line warm up and he loved the way that they were shooting their hands and running their feet during warm-ups. He said it was the best that he had ever seen, to the point where he came up with this period we would do in practice every day called the difference, where we would just shoot our hands and run our feet, and we would work on that one specific skill every single day, every position group. And it was called the difference because that was the difference between them and us. And it actually spun off into a business for one of our strength coaches. He came up with an apparatus for it. All that to say, that's what Alabama football was, down to the very nitty-gritty details of how they warm up for a game and what made them better than everybody else. And so this idea of the discussion of effort is mind-boggling to me. And Kalen DeBoer can get them together, right? Like he can get everybody going in the same direction, get the effort right. But it is alarming that we're sitting here in week one, and that's the thing we're discussing about Alabama.
All right, I want to get one more reaction from you from a quote that was making the rounds this week. AJ McCarron, quote, "You look at these other teams that have $40 to $50 million in NIL. Alabama, and I know this for a fact, talking to multiple people in the program, Alabama has less than $20 million in their NIL. First of all, there's not a lot of programs who are above 30. So that's just like over exaggerating for this point. But I think it stems, it was an interesting jumping off point for a lot of people, A, about like how much people are actually spending, but B, Alabama crying poor in this situation, and C, that Alabama did have one of the most talented rosters. Like, they had the number 2 recruiting class in 24/7 sports. So it's not a talent question. They were able to whatever they spent got them the players they want. That's not the problem. But it is interesting to have, a couple of years, what year 1 into the redshirt era, a couple years into NIL, Alabama being like, well, we can't keep up with the Joneses.
It's a super intriguing thing to me. I've worked with AJ before actually, and I love working with him because he's got a strong take on everything. And there are people who I think are starting to see though that maybe there's not as much money in the South as there are in some of the other regions of the United States. And so like maybe he's forecasting for down the line. The idea that their NIL roster this year has any bearing on their talent is insane. Alabama has, I think they're tied for first with Ohio State in blue chip ratio this year, which is the relation between the number of 4 and 5 stars on your roster compared to the rest of your roster, right? So they've got more 4 and 5 stars than anybody else in the United States of America. So maybe down the line, they might have to ask the question about, can we keep this up? Are we going to have the money to make sure we can continue this for the next 4 to 5 years? Today, that is not a problem for them. They have as good of players as anybody in America.
Another news item, the targeting call against Jayshon Barham upheld, so he will not be in the game for Michigan against Oklahoma in the first half. We'll get to that game preview a little bit later, but you and I were talking offline about this call. So this was the reason that a lot of people were upset about it and that Michigan tried to appeal it was because it's not really like when I look at targeting, and usually I do defend the existence of it because I think what they're trying to do is to legislate certain plays out of the game so that they teach you how to tackle and practice differently. So to me, when I think of targeting, like textbook targeting, I think of like someone using their helmet like as a spear to try to tackle somebody. This wasn't that. I know you agree. You think that like by the letter of the law, like there was helmet contact and defenseless player, but it really was like it was a tackle. Or it looked like he kind of moved his head to the side. Their helmets collide, and that could end up being pretty significant in this game. And my thing on targeting is we have this conversation every year about like, and whenever I bring this up with Steve Shaw or anyone at the NCAA, their argument is it has to be a severe penalty because you're trying to change behavior. But man, it's just one thing to eject someone from a game, but another thing to then withhold them from a half from another game, especially when it's just one that's like, I don't think the intention was there. And it's kind of like, okay, by the letter of the law, you call it or you add it back in replay.
So I guess my whole thing about like it has to be a severe penalty is my argument against that is if you're Jayshon Barham and you have that penalty in the second half of the game against New Mexico and they say you can't come back into competition for the rest of that game, I think that's a wake up call to say, well, I'm not going to hit like that when we play Oklahoma. So it doesn't have to be the next half of the next game because it happened in the second half. I do think it's overly punitive. Um, it's one of those calls to me where if they didn't call it, I wouldn't be mad, but I'm also not mad that they did because you talked about it. But the letter of the law says like defenseless quarterback in a throwing posture is one thing. They're trying to protect those guys. And then the fact that the contact was forcible to the head area with his helmet, totally get it. Didn't lead with the crown. So like that's where a lot of people are like, it wasn't super violent, but it's almost like to me that hit is like the illegal blindside block that they've taken out of the game where you don't have to like hit somebody in the head. If they're not in a position to defend themselves, that becomes an illegal hit. Plus they can add targeting on top of that. So I think it's this whole idea of you have to know how and when you can hit somebody. My thing about this, which is crazy, and maybe why it's even more, it might be defending how dumb it is. If he makes that same hit, but he hits the quarterback in the chest, he's probably breaking that kid's sternum, and it's a worse outcome. But that's what they're telling you to do. They would rather you do that than to hit him in the head with your helmet, regardless of if it's crown, whatever, when he's defenseless. So I understand it. I get why it's enforced. By the letter of the law, that is the penalty. I do think it's overly punitive, and it was one of those calls where if they didn't call it, you wouldn't hear me talking about it.
Yeah, and I think that would have been the case across the board. where again, it's like, it's hard where I think with targeting, we're often litigating, overly aggressive targeting calls
Right,
versus
right.
not like, oh, there should have been targeting, right? Like that doesn't happen as much. So we'll get to the Michigan Oklahoma game in just a second. One more news item off the field. This is a lawsuit track. There's a group of athletes, including 2 Vanderbilt football players, that had filed a class action lawsuit against the NCAA, arguing basically for getting rid of the redshirt rule. They're saying 5 years, 5 seasons of competition. This is actually something that the NCAA and various committees have been looking at. This is not necessarily a bad thing or something the NCAA wouldn't be receptive to. The argument is that when you go to campus, you have a 5-year clock for your eligibility, but you only get 4 seasons, so you're able to practice that entire time. You can redshirt one of those seasons. Again, you need waivers, there's injuries and things that extend that 5-year clock. But the argument is, well, that's kind of arbitrary. We agree that you have a limit. You don't have just like unlimited eligibility forever, but it's restrictive if you're already allowing 5 years, but you're not allowing people to, compete in actual games for the 5 years. It affects your marketability and your earning potential, all of those other types of arguments we see in the NIL era. But this is just something to track, because if you go to 5 for 5, so you get 5 years and 5 seasons, that certainly will have an impact on college sports at large, football at large, and it would mean the end of the redshirt rule, which for football you get a quarter of the season that you're able to play without it counting against you as a season of competition. But that would also impact other sports. So this is a big one. Class action affects all of college sports. And I think, again, is something that the NCAA is receptive, has explored. These conversations have been ongoing, might get us to that finish point sooner than it was going to happen otherwise.
Yeah, I feel like this might be a little bit of a bigger deal in basketball than it would be in football, because you have a lot of guys who are very skilled basketball players, but they end up as guys who play overseas because of their size or because of exactly what that skill set is and how it's played in the NBA, where you see 4-year players that are phenomenal and then don't go on to have great careers. What's interesting to me on the football side is, like, if you redshirt, it's literally because you're not good enough. Like, nobody is redshirting you when you can help the team win. And so my whole thing about that is, like, we want the 5 to play for our marketability. You're not marketable. You're not good enough to play yet.
Right. But I think, okay, so we have seen a couple of side effects of where things are. Some guys have shut it down to preserve a red shirt because they want to transfer the next year, so they could
No
be
doubt.
helping their team. There's also been years where, from attrition and injuries, you need guys later in the season, but you don't want to burn a red shirt, right? So, like, to me, I think that there's like safety reasons that this is probably good to not have to worry about, the amount of games someone plays. And if you need bodies later in a year and it doesn't like hurt you.
We can talk about that point separately, but this idea that the red shirt is hurting players' marketability is pissing me
Well,
off,
I think
because
it's just
you're
part
not
of
a
the
good
their
enough
argument.
player to play.
No,
You're
but this
not
is
marketable.
part of the legal argument, right? Is
I
that it
know, but
affects
it's a
your
dumb
earning.
argument. It's
The bigger,
stupid.
the stronger argument is just like, it doesn't make sense, right? Like a lot of the things that
Yes,
are being
that's the
challenged now
argument.
don't make
I'm
sense.
here for that argument. But
Right.
this other argument is insane to me. And
Well,
we should
it's
call
just
it
part of it.
insane.
It's just part of it. It's just part of it. Okay, let's get back
Got me
to
fired up on a
football.
podcast on Thursday morning. It's crazy.
About a lawsuit. I'm so excited. All right, let's get fired up about actual football. Okay, so this is the watch back. We're going to look back at the top storylines. We're going to tie up loose ends from our recording because we were doing it before games finished on Saturday. Week 1, you also have Sunday games and Monday games. So we have three things that we need to hit on. The first thing is LSU. It was a dominant defensive, especially by the defense in the second half,
Yes.
to get the win over Clemson. Certainly could say it's Brian Kelly's best win since getting to Baton Rouge. I think it cements LSU as maybe the favorite in the SEC right now. Certainly a national title contender with a defense like that. And listen, both defenses dominated a lot of this game, but certainly Garrett Nussmeier outperformed Cade Klubnik. And again, it was a really impressive win. Probably should have been by 2 scores because that touchdown came off the board. Interesting post-game recap comment. So this was from Dabo's press conference early in the week afterwards. He said, quote, "It was a hell of a game right down to the last play. Right out of the gate, it's like getting the final exam on day one of class. They made a 65, we made a 58. Neither one of us were great. Brian Kelly heard this, and again, he's coming off one of his best wins of his career, certainly his best win at LSU, and he took issue with what Dabo had to say about how he was graded.
Him in the second half, so he's either a really good grader for giving himself a 58, or he's a really hard grader on us, or he didn't see the second half, which that might be the case. He might not have wanted to see the second half. So again, look, this is all past.
So he did not agree with Dabo's grading. And, listen, I do think it was an incredibly impressive second half. And some people are talking about this LSU win as if it was like 42-7, like it was just this fully dominant game. It wasn't, but the second half was really, really impressive, and LSU should be proud of that.
I tend to agree with it. I feel like BK just doesn't feel like the right guy to be at the podium, firing back. Like it just wearing the suit too. Just nobody ever looks like they should be firing back wearing a suit like that. But anyway, I am of the opinion that this was one of his best wins, and especially that second half for LSU. They played really good ball. Their defense has taken a step. You said this, and we talked about this earlier in the week, that there were people who were acting like they won this game by 4 touchdowns. And I want to touch on that for a sec. You're an AP voter. You had Ohio State number 1.
Yes.
What was the difference for you to say that Ohio State, clear number 1 team, versus LSU on the road against Clemson, they should be number 2 in that spot?
Yeah, so I had LSU at 2. And there ultimately were not a lot of AP poll voters that put LSU 1, but that was a conversation that was being had on Sunday. And I felt like it was coming from this idea, like with a little bit of time and space after the Ohio State game, that Ohio State's offense was terrible in that game, right? And like you look at like the post-game win expectancy, it was very low for Ohio State. It basically saying that like they're fortunate that they were able to win because like they didn't necessarily outplay Texas throughout, according to a lot of these metrics. They struggled to run the ball, et cetera, et cetera. It felt like the further we got away from, whatever time, 3 p.m. or whenever that game ended, people were like discounting it. And they were like, well, it's a win over a brand new starting quarterback at home. And it was close and their offense didn't do anything. And it just felt like it was discounting the quality of the win and the caliber of the win in a game that featured 2 of the best defenses in the country. And arguably, Texas is going to be the best defense that Ohio State faces. You had Ryan Day after the game saying, hey, we probably could have opened it up more for Julian Sayin, but we didn't do that, because it was his first start. You also had a lot of what Texas was doing late, which again changed some of the metrics and the way that we view the final box score. They were speeding up, they were trying to catch up and come back in the game, right? They were shut out through 3 quarters. Like they weren't doing
right, and did nothing in those 3 quarters. It was bad. Yeah.
Arch Manning was in hell, right? Like that's what the story of the game was. And I think it's like retroactively kind of changing the narrative to discount the Ohio State win. But most of all, I mean, a week ago or whenever we did the preseason ballot, I put Texas as my number 1 team in the country. I know preseason polls are very difficult. You're not basing it on a lot, but I don't want to immediately then flip and go, actually, they weren't that good. So I'm totally going to change my line of thinking here and not give Ohio State credit for that win. And I'm going to like leapfrog with teams that I had ranked behind Texas. I'm not going to do that. But I get the argument that it was a very good second half for LSU. It was a win on the road and all of that. But it's like, we can't just abandon what we thought about Texas and discount it because of how bad Arch Manning looked in that game. So again, all of this can adapt and change as we get more and more data points. If LSU is better than Ohio State and they keep racking up good wins, they will surpass Ohio State. Like that's how it'll work. I just thought that argument was like a very strange one to make coming off of that game for Ohio State to be like, well, actually their offense didn't do anything and Arch was really bad. So therefore, it's not a quality win, when it's like, well, the reason Arch wasn't very good is because of Ohio State. And Ohio State did what they needed to do to win the game offensively and could have done more, but didn't. And I don't know. I just thought it's a fair argument to make. I think it's a good conversation, but for me, it wasn't a difficult vote to go with Ohio State.
Yeah, I'm there with you, and I would make the argument after watching that game back for Ohio State offensively, like the run game's a problem for me, and they're gonna have to find ways to get more creative. But Julian played really well. I
He
agree with
looks
Ryan Day.
comfortable.
Yeah, he does. I agree with Ryan Day. They could open it up more. And by the way, a lot of key drops. Max Clare had drops. Jeremiah had drops. Brandon Ennis on a slot fade had a drop that would have gone for a huge play. Like you, and these are, I'm saying it because these are guys who typically catch the football. It's not like they're Georgia from last year where their MO is dropping the ball. All that to say, like that game could have been completely different if those guys actually execute the way we know that they can. So all that to say, I appreciate the conversation too, because LSU was very impressive. As you mentioned, like Nussmeier, especially in that second half, he got a little bit banged up and came back, was playing very well. But it feels to me that if we believe that Texas has the defense that they had, and we believe that Ohio State has the defense they have, plus their offense maybe didn't open it up as much, that's the number one team.
Yeah, I get like the question about LSU, but I wouldn't have voted it that way. And I did put them number 2 ahead of Penn State because
Right.
of the quality of win over Clemson.
Yes.
All right, give me a thought on Miami and a thought on Notre Dame after a really, I think, impressive opening win for the Canes.
Okay, so Miami was the thing that I talked about where I thought they were going to be very good in the trenches, and they were both offensively and defensively. And I think their defense as a whole has taken a really big step, so that's huge. Carson Beck is still a question mark to me because I thought he made some throws that if his receivers weren't, playing the way that they played, kind of could have gone the wrong way. On the Notre Dame side, I think my biggest issue with them was the way that they called the offense. It was a lot of RPO, which the defense essentially dictates what the offense is going to do. If the defense decides that they want to defend the run, you throw it. And if they decide they want to defend the pass, you run it. And Miami said, we're not going to let Notre Dame run all over us. So we're definitely going to bite on the run. If we see that the run is an option, we're taking that away. And they should have just called more runs for Jeremiah Love. He's too good of a player to not get more touches in that game. And that was probably my biggest issue.
I think that was what Notre Dame fans would say as well. A lot of memes being like, "Hey, Mike Denbrock, run the ball, like give Jeremiah Love the ball." But you're right, because it wasn't necessarily designed runs. That there
Right.
were options to do it. I thought CJ Carr was really impressive.
He
I
was.
thought especially, the drive to go tie the game up, put Notre Dame in position to have a chance to win the game.
After the
He's
interception too, which was a big
yeah,
deal.
he
Yeah.
seemed really poised and in control, and confident. So I think it's weird, like, to come out of that game and be like, well, I've got questions about the offensive line, especially left tackle. And then also, like, is Notre Dame's defense going to get are they going to be able to push guys around up front, but feel good about CJ Carr, right? And then also, like, okay, Jordan Faison got a lot of targets. What about the other receivers? What about them? Like, I have a lot of questions about things, but weirdly, after a very like debated quarterback battle, I feel pretty good about CJ Carr, and it's like these other pieces around him. And now they have 2 weeks before A&M. That game's at home. You can figure some of this stuff out, but there's definitely some questions and some cause for concern for Notre Dame fans off of that performance. But the flip side of that is, like, Miami feels like they're almost back, or like back adjacent, because the offensive line and the defensive line really dictating so much of this game. That's different, because this defense a year ago cost them a chance at the college football playoff.
Yep.
They have dudes. They have a freshman receiver who's going to be a star. I thought Carson Beck actually played pretty well. Like, I don't think without a veteran quarterback like Carson Beck, I don't know if you win that game. And I think that they feel really good about him. They feel like he's really confident and fitting in well, based on conversations I've had with people at Miami. So I think that changes some things in the ACC, which heading into the year, I was very much like Clemson and everybody else. Now you've got Miami and Florida State making big statements right out of the gate. And Florida State, like, had the most dominant win in their win over Alabama. So now it makes it a much more intriguing ACC race and competition, even though Miami is not going to play Clemson. All right, let's get to Monday night before we flip the
Can I,
page 2 weeks.
real
Yeah.
quick,
Oh, go ahead.
hit
Yeah.
on Miami? So one of the things that stands out to me about them, is Miami was like the poster child for the NIL babies, where they were just
Mhm.
offering crazy money to recruits and they were flipping them from places like Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama. And now those guys are in year 3 and year 4 in that program. So that, like, to me, I think that is a big part of this story is like they've gotten much better from a fundamental and technical standpoint. They also have veteran players who are really highly regarded coming out of high school, and those guys are hitting their stride right now too.
Yeah. And then you have the young guys like a Malachi Tony, who's going to be
Yeah.
really, really, really fun to
Just
watch.
really good. Yeah.
Okay, we'll get to Bill Belichick again a little bit later in the show, but that was a stunner. I mean, we talked about all the things we were interested in. Going up, like you kept bringing up that TCU is like a very college football program. The way that they, the creativity and their play calling, the type of player they recruit and develop, all the different things with them. I was interested to see, hey, what's it like when things don't go well, when there are mistakes in a game? Well, there were a lot of them. They went over 2 hours between completing passes at one point for Gio Lopez. It was a disaster for Bill Belichick's debut.
It was so bad. And it was like the most NFL thing ever, too, because they had the first 10 play script and they go just right down the field and they score. And everybody's like, oh, Bill, he's built for this. Look at this NFL coach. And then it was like disaster ensues. And it was bad. And the biggest thing that stands out to me is these guys couldn't block and they couldn't tackle. And Nicole, you brought up the point when we were doing our Saturday show and you asked Sims, like, what are you looking out for? And he was like, oh, they do the basics. They do the basics. They didn't do any damn basics. And I started to ask the question once I saw that, did they maybe assume a baseline level of competency for college players that they would be able to do some of the fundamental things that guys just come into the NFL already doing? And
We
you know
talked
how
about
I
that though.
am.
You can't assume that.
There's no assuming. You know how I am. Every week, I'm like, I'm going to open up a tackling school because nobody knows
Yeah.
how to tackle anymore. The
Yep.
first client for me is going to be Bill Belichick. They need it the most. It is so bad down there. So it was shocking because we know he's a better coach than that. But also, I don't think you and I looked at this and said, like, oh, this is absolutely going to be an easy thing for him. He hired his friends and his children. Freddie Kitchens was one of the worst NFL coaches when he was with the Cleveland Browns, and they got a lot of bad coaches there. But like, there are guys that were super question marks. The GM of his program's a big question mark, and then they go out there and lay an egg.
I've said it from the second he got hired. This is going to be harder than Bill Belichick realizes. It's going to be harder than our pals in the NFL media realize. I mean, I think they all
They were wearing me out.
continue to treat college football like a JV version of the NFL. These are totally different sports.
Yes.
There's also a reason that a lot of the creativity or styles of play go from college to the NFL, and that's the direction that they move schematically. It is difficult and it is hard when guys make mistakes, when they come in at 17 and 18, when you have to navigate now NIL and rev share and positional value. And you bring in all of these people with NFL experience and you don't have a base of college football experience, this is going to happen. Obviously, the talent level isn't anywhere near where like North Carolina is going to contend in the ACC. They're going to lose games based on talent level. But all of the things that you can control, which is staffing, structuring the offseason, practice scheme, is on Bill Belichick for going in and saying, I know how to do this. We're going to come in. We've seen coaches do this from the NFL. They come in and they say, we're going to do it exactly the way that I've done it in the NFL, and it's going to work. It doesn't work like that. Herm Edwards, we're going to do this differently. It's going to be like an NFL model. It's a different sport, different schemes. You need to be good at different things. And if you don't, and you think you know what it is, this is the sort of outcome that happens. It's also, by the way, I mean, I know Gio Lopez got hurt in this game, and that's what led to Max Johnson coming in. Maybe the wrong quarterback was started.
Maybe you evaluated the wrong guy.
Right.
Yeah. It's wild to me too, because people are talking about the talent, and like it's a hard thing to avoid because the roster's not there yet. These are also the guys that he brought in, and there were a lot of people, NFL media people, by the way, telling me that he's just going to walk in everybody's living room and he's going to show them 8 rings that he won in the NFL, and he's going to get all of the best players. These boys don't give a damn. What can you do for me today? You got to recruit me right now. I don't care what you did. And that's kind of showing up too. You bring in 70 players and it doesn't seem like they're the right ones.
And last point on this is, a lot about college football is development. You are not starting with pros. You have to build them into that. And listen, I know, there's a bunch of those stories of guys that were overlooked or lacrosse players who became football players that Bill Belichick coach, but that's the entire ask here. That's your job at North Carolina.
All I
I
know
think
is
at
he
this point
took
you got to.
Mac Jones as a Heisman finalist, and his best year in the NFL was his first year. That's all I know about development.
Good point. It's a good point. Got to recalibrate expectations or goals. I think you got to be happy with a bowl game now if you're a North Carolina fan after that type of performance and shellacking from TCU, which clearly felt disrespected in the way that everyone talked about that game. All right, let's flip gears. We are going to start looking forward now for week 2. Time for Imagine That, presented by Xfinity. We are going to give you kind of a look forward, a potential stat line, potential scenario. We're going to imagine it. I'm going to say, imagine that Arch Manning throws for 3 touchdowns, runs for another against San Jose State, and looks like the quarterback that we thought he is. This has to be a get-right game for Arch Manning. Like, he has to gain confidence. And he's got 3 weeks to do this before they play Florida, and that's going to have its own narratives, and at the quarterback position especially. But this has to be that kind of game for Arch Manning. Like, the ball has to look good coming off his arm. You can't come like sidearmed. We can't see like the footwork issues that we saw from him. I do think he needs to. I threw in that rushing touchdown because I think he needs to scoot a little bit. We need to see him move and kind of the athleticism, the comfort in the game and in the offense. They should be able to do what they want. They should be able to work through the parts of the offense that did not work against the Matt Patricia defense. So I'm saying that. Imagine Arch is responsible for four touchdowns and looks good again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the likely scenario with Arch. And then all of the people who were like, oh, this guy's generational are going to be back at it. But I think what's going to happen is the people who cover this sport and have for a very long time are going to be like, okay, this is probably what we can expect. And this is what he has looked like and who we understand him to be. I think the rushing touchdown is very key as well because that offense is much better when he can run. There's a thought in my mind that Sark was like, okay, the last time we played Ohio State, we used him as our like running guy and we got him smoked. And we don't have the luxury of getting him smoked this time around. And maybe it changed his mentality on how many times he wanted to see his quarterback get hit in that game. But I think against San Jose, you're going to be able to go out there and get whatever looks you want and get him comfortable in the game plan.
All right, you want to give us yours?
Yes.
Your imagination?
So, yes, my imagine that Bryce Underwood throws for 3 touchdowns versus Oklahoma. So, this kind of goes back to the conversations we were having a week ago about this guy, where everybody thought he was very talented. Everybody thought that he could step right in and make an impact on this offense, and he did. But it was against New Mexico, and so, of course, there are going to be haters out there who are like, oh, it was only New Mexico. Guys, I thought he was really impressive. I thought he looked very comfortable. He added a different dimension to the offense with some of the stuff they could do in the RPO game, his ability to throw at all levels of the field, and he didn't even really run in that game. But this is the moment that you get early on in a young man's career where you have a Power 4 opponent. You're going on the road as an underdog to play in this game. Imagine that Bryce Underwood has 3 touchdowns in this game. I think that would squarely put him in the Heisman conversation and squarely put him on a level of we haven't seen this type of performance from a freshman in a little while.
I like this a lot because the more I've sat with this matchup all week, I've kind of talked myself into Michigan winning. And I think like Michigan fans had a lot of angst about like the defense allowing New Mexico to stay in the game. Listen, I think Jason Eck is a really creative coach. He had a trick play touchdown. Like there were reasons that, and I thought you have to give credit to New Mexico.
He did it last year against Oregon, by the way, when he was at
Almost
Idaho, for folks who weren't following that. Yeah.
Yes, he was at Idaho and they were within 3 points against the number 1 team in the country all year.
Yep.
I am not, so I'm going to say like, let's not hit the panic button on Michigan's defense after that game and the fact that New Mexico was in it. I think for as much as I really enjoy John Mateer, and we loved him, like he was must-see TV in our screening room last year because when he was at Wazoo, really fun to watch. I think sometimes, he's very much in the no, yes camp, where he's going to do things that are going to be really frustrating. He might try to be a little too fancy and like no look certain moments and certain plays at the quarterback position. Don't think you're going to be able to do that against Michigan. They're going to make you pay for that. Bryce Underwood, I think, is the real deal. He looked so much more comfortable than I expected right out of the gate. And listen, everyone's been raving about him. I guess I can't be too surprised. But this is going to be a big test. Brent Venables is calling the defense now for Oklahoma. Like that's where we are in the sense of urgency for the Sooners. But man, I mean, that arm and how effortless it looked. He was just hitting all over the field. He seemed to have pretty good chemistry with his receivers. They have a tight end. They have running backs that are really, really good. I thought that was another takeaway from Michigan, hitting on the running back position. So I have a feeling, and I know the line in this is 4.5. It's kind of a lot of points, especially on the road in Norman. Sharon Moore coaching against his alma mater. But I think in terms of the quarterbacks, which is kind of crazy to say, because again, John Mateer is super experienced, and he kind of did the import the offense situation where you bring the OC and the quarterback to Oklahoma. There's been a lot of hype around that, but I think I'm going to take Michigan to cover this game.
It's interesting. I'm with you on your analysis of Mateer. I feel like he's one of those guys who could just throw it to the other team at any point and you'll just sit there and be dumbfounded. I think that there is, you mentioned the urgency. I think it's a huge deal for Oklahoma, and playing at home, I do think is going to be big in terms of the Bryce Underwood portion of this, because it is difficult as a player to go on the road generally, but as a young quarterback, like that's when it can start to get a little bit crazy, especially if you see big momentum swings. That might take him out of the game for a second here. It would not shock me if Michigan won this game. It would not shock me if Michigan covered in this game, but I think I am going to roll with Oklahoma. The Barham first half thing is just kind of lingering in my mind too, especially with the quarterback that can run. It messes with the defense a little bit. So I think I'm going to roll with Oklahoma, but I don't feel great about it, people.
I think it's going to be a really good game. I think going into the year with all that was turning over at Michigan, I was like, all right, Oklahoma will win that game, whatever, kind of writing it off. And now I think it's much more intriguing. And I hope it stays close, because I'd like to learn a lot about both teams. That was Imagine That, presented by Xfinity. Time for the walkthrough. We're going to look ahead at 3 other games headlining week 2. It's definitely not the same slate as it was with week 1, but I think there's some really interesting barometer games, right? Like where we're going to learn a little bit. Honestly, we're going to learn, because we picked 3 games that involve Big Ten teams. They're in a lot of crossover games against the Big 12 and the ACC. You're going to learn about the depth of the Big Ten conference. You're going to learn outside of Ohio State beating Texas, the kind of the top. What else you got? So you're going to learn about Oregon as they play Oklahoma State. Illinois as a potential CFP contender. Here's their first big test against Duke. And then you have the Cy-Hawk game, Iowa State, always one of the best rivalry games of the year, but also really interesting with the way that the Cyclones are playing. I mean, they're playing like they should be the favorite in the Big 12. So let's start with Oregon and Oklahoma State. Kind of a sneaky good game, even though shocking. Like the line on this is crazy. Oregon's favored by 28.5 points. I want to set this up before we get into the game, because the coaches have been sparring a little bit this week. So on his radio show on Monday, Mike Gundy said Oklahoma State spent around $7 million on its roster over the past 3 years, and then was talking about how much Oregon has spent. He says, I think Oregon spent close to $40 million last year alone. So that was just 1 year. Now I might be off a few million. Made a couple other comments. He said that it'll cost a lot of money to keep Dante Moore, the quarterback at Oregon, and that he thinks Oregon's budget should determine who they play when they play in the non-conference. He said, quote, Oregon is paying a lot of money for their team. From a non-conference standpoint, there's coaches saying they should play teams with similar budgets. Dan Lanning, of course, heard this, and he responded as only Dan Lanning can.
Listening to him talk, like I said, I got a ton of respect for Coach Gundy. Ultimately, how blessed are we to be in a place that's invested in winning? If you want to be a top 10 team in college football, you better be invested in winning. And we spend to win. Some people save to have an excuse for why they don't, right? And ultimately, like, he's a great coach. They've done an unbelievable job, but I want to be a team that's competing at the highest level. And we're really fortunate to be in that situation. So I can't speak on their situation. I have no idea, what they got in their pockets over there. I'm sure UT Martin maybe didn't have as much as them last week, and they played. So we'll let it play out.
A little spicy, Dan Lanning.
If you're broke, just say that. That's all I heard from Dan Lanning. If you're broke, just say it. And you know what? I'm with Dan Lanning on this one, because it was definitely like a pick and choose your spots from Gundy. Like, you play teams that certainly do not spend the money that you do out of conference, and like Oregon. It's up to you. If you want to do that, you can do that, but don't point at the pocketbook and say that's the reason why you can't compete. You either got to raise more money or you got to talk to your AD and say, we're not doing this again.
They had one of the most exciting, biggest name players in all of college football coming back last year in Ollie Gordon, and then he did nothing. And then Oklahoma State lost so many games that Mike Gundy had to completely overhaul his staff. This is a crazy stat, okay? So he kept 2 assistants, and then everyone else is new this year because, again, you remember the standoff. I mean, like, he almost left. Like, he almost got forced out at Oklahoma State, but he agreed to restructure his contract, put some of his money towards NIL. Speaking of spending money on your players.
Well, not enough money, clearly.
They also obviously had to redo his staff because he had a number of people who have been with him most of the time in Stillwater. The 2 assistants he retained came to Stillwater last year. So it's a very new look. Like, this is very different from the way Mike Gundy has always done it. You have an Oregon team that we talk about year in and year out. They're going to invest. They're going to be physical. They're going to build the roster in the program like an SEC team because of Dan Lanning's background, of course. Dante Moore, you have the luxury of someone who was in the quarterback room for a year behind Dylan Gabriel, learning from him. He looked really good in his debut against Montana State, 18 of 23, 213 yards, 3 touchdowns. Again, the spread is really big here, but I kind of feel like Dan Lanning was pissed off enough about the comment about, like, you're only good because you spend and you buy good players in an era where that is legal to do, that I think Oregon's going to cover.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing that's been lingering for me is, like, pissed off Dan Lanning, kind of dark side Dan Lanning. Might not call off the dogs in this one. There's also the idea, too, of Dan knows that they're going to be playing late into the year and they're going to have guys ready. And so you might have to put your pettiness aside and pull the guys when it's time to pull them. Dante Moore,
in a power 4 matchup, by the way, like, that's,
yeah, I know the way we're talking about this is insane. Dante Moore was so much fun to watch last week, and he's going to be a player that I'll have my eyes on this year for the reason that you mentioned, with him taking a year to just learn. Right. And, like, I thought that was a very mature decision for a player to make. And so I'm excited about his development. I'm actually going to buck the trend here. The number is super big for me. I think Oklahoma State will cover, but Oregon's going to win very comfortably.
Let's go to Illinois at Duke. Sneaky good game. Kind of had this one circled for a while because I've been so high on Illinois, in part because of their schedule. This was the big non-conference game. This is a Duke team that, Brett Bielema brought this up, and I talked to him, that, like, people really did not give Duke a lot of credit last year for the amount of wins that they had. They had a lot of, like, crazy finishes, where you could say certainly they were, a little fortunate in some of them. But this is a game where Duke's favored by 3 points. It feels like a really important game for both programs trying to see who they're going to be this year. Illinois, from a conference standpoint, they have Ohio State, but they avoid Penn State. They avoid Oregon. They avoid Michigan, who we think might end up being pretty good. So the path is there for a potential 11-1 season, a record, maybe 10-2. They've got Indiana in a couple of weeks. Like, the Duke and the Indiana games are going to give us a really good sense before we hit October of if this is a true CFP contender. On the Duke side, you've got Darian Mensah, who is one of these really high-profile quarterback transfers, a big winner for Duke. They spent money to get him from Tulane. He had they played Elon, but, he threw for almost 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. Couple that with a defense and the identity that you're going to have for Manny Diaz as the head coach. for the Blue Devils. And this is just a super intriguing game. I think I'm going to take Illinois to cover because, I'm really high on them and I've got them in the playoff. But it's definitely a more challenging game than it looks on paper. I think in part because of Mensa and just the quarterback play. But also, this is a team that won a lot of games, figured out ways to win a lot of games last year.
Yeah, I'm totally there with you. Mensa, great get for Duke. They spent some money to do it, and I don't see them complaining about how much other people are spending. Neither here nor there. The Manny Diaz defense, I think, is something I'm going to be watching. From that game last week against Western Illinois, there was not a singular chance that Illinois was going to mess that up. But toward the end of the first half, Luke Altmaier started holding the ball a little bit, and he looked like he was just trying to make plays that maybe weren't there. And you can't do that going against a defensive mind like Manny Diaz. The thing I will say that was really refreshing was going into the half, Brett Bielema was asked about getting on his offensive line. He's like, we got guys going the wrong way. They're running into each other. That is not good football. And he is on it. Very attentive to detail. I say that every time I talk about him. But I think he understands the moment that they're up against with how good they can be, and he's not going to let anything slide. So I'm going to go with Illinois to cover in this one as well.
And 2 quick points to wrap up the Illinois discussion. One of their goals with that opener was to try to put playmakers in positions to make plays and see what they've got. So I do think that could have contributed to holding the ball just a little bit longer, because the big question offensively is receivers, and kind of seeing who else can be go-to guys, with that position group. The other thing I'll say is Illinois has been preparing for this, right? You don't only prepare for your opener when you've got Duke and then Indiana in the first month. So even their scrimmages, because they've got a super veteran team, so they're trying to mix it up a little bit. But because they had, a night game and then a noon kick, they had some of their scrimmages at different times throughout fall camp to try to just make sure that the body clocks and things were going to be ready to go for this game, week 2 against Duke. Last game preview, and then we'll get to our underdog picks. Iowa State. So Cyclones favored by 3.5 points. Genuinely, this is one of the great rivalry games. It's also, again, a really good gauge usually for both of these programs early in the season. I really like what we're seeing out of Iowa State. They played 2 games, right? Because they played week 0 in Ireland. And they came back and played a very good FCS team and crushed them, right? K-State almost lost coming off their Ireland game. It almost filled into 2 losses for them. But Iowa State was on it. I really think, Rocco Becht is one of the good quarterback, really good college quarterback, reliable for what they're doing. But they just seem really prepared. They just feel like they're on it. Feels like they're clean and that they're going to be in the hunt in the Big 12, maybe the favorite as we sit here right now. Iowa still working through its offensive issues and figuring out, can this be easier to score points, to move the ball? So I'm certainly leaning Iowa State covering, because I'm a little surprised that they're not favored by more, because it's at home, it's in Ames. But I do think, there's a real opportunity here for Iowa to be we're different. We can do something offensively. Year 2 under Tim Lester. Mark Gronowski was it cramps? He had, a minor, he had to come out of the game a little bit in their opener, but I don't know. I just feel better about where Iowa State is in who they want to be, their identity, and their execution through 2 games.
Yeah, I'm pretty much there with you on that. Iowa State won this one last year, correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the last time that they won back-to-back in this rivalry was somewhere in the early 2010s. And so I think that plays a factor into this. Kirk Ferentz, is he going to let his rival get one over on him 2 years in a row? Don't feel like it. It was funny watching the Iowa game, because early on they were throwing the football and you're like, oh, look, they're throwing it. And then it ended up looking like a very Iowa football passing stat line. I'm actually rolling with the Hawkeyes here. I think just off of vibes and the fact that they're not going to let their rival get 2 in a row.
It's a really good point. Okay, so Iowa State won last year 20-19. Actually, remember that was a painful loss in my household. I'm married to a Hawkeye.
I'm sure it was.
But you're correct. Last time Iowa State won back-to-back games in this rivalry, 2011 and 2012. So there is a lot of history at stake. This is one where it feels like the team that we think we feel better about usually loses. So I could 100%. Certainly be wrong here. Time for week 2 underdog picks. I would like the record to reflect that I am 1-0. Joshua is 0-1. That's okay. Over the course
I
of
like
the
to
season,
say that I'm not
check a
1-0,
record.
not 0-1. I'm just not 1-0.
Yours was really off. You had
So,
UCLA. They got crushed by Utah.
there was a pass early in the game that Nico missed early, and I think that was like a 4-touchdown swing. I think that was all the momentum they needed, and they didn't get it. It was.
All right. My pick
Why you
was
gotta hate?
correct, though. Toledo covered. It was a little dicey late, but proud of them. Joshua, why don't you go first? You give us your underdog pick of the week.
All right, I'm fading Toledo because I'm petty. How about that? No, they're playing Western Kentucky, who's already played 2 games this season. I actually think this is a pretty good matchup for them. Maverick McIver did the thing where he brought his coordinator to Western Kentucky as well, and the offense has been really good. 8 touchdowns, no interceptions in 2 games, and only 2 sacks taken.
And his
They're
name
rushing it
is
for
Maverick McIver.
It's a quarterbacky name, so it
It
feels good. They're rushing it at 4 yards a carry too, and they don't run a ton, but when they do, it's effective, and they've hit some explosives there. Toledo defensively, like pretty good against Zach Calzada, but like I don't think he's that great of a player. And both of their fronts, I think, struggled at times. Their defensive front certainly did against the run. Their offensive front wasn't very explosive in the run game. I'm not necessarily picking the outright win here, although I think they can get it done. But with an offense like Western Kentucky, they're certainly going to keep it close here. I feel pretty good about this one.
Okay, I think that's also like a sneaky good group of 6 game. So definitely worth
shout them
watching.
out. Yeah,
we do. And I'm going to take a group of 6 team again to cover. I don't know if they'll win, but you know what? Bill Belichick's debut was so bad that I wonder if it spills into week 2, right? Like, how do you respond from this? It's going to be very difficult. Gio Lopez, unclear if he's going to start. It might be Max Johnson, who, by the way, like, might have played better than him. I know he was playing much later in the game. Had the nice touchdown.
I think he did.
Brother had a really like. It got to the point where we're like, did Bill Belichick pick the wrong quarterback? So let's roll into that. Let's lean into that a little bit further. I know Charlotte lost their opener. They got 12.5 points here against North Carolina. It feels like there's blood in the water. Okay, like how bad can this get for North Carolina? Feels like the right time to take Char Heel's opponent and see if they can at least keep it close. If they keep it close, something could go wrong for North Carolina. They get tight. They're expected to win this one. They're expected to beat TCU too, but it just feels like we're gonna see how low this can go. Like, are we gonna reach a new bottom here in the Bill Belichick era?
I just hope they didn't watch the tape. Like, there are times where I don't think watching the game tape's appropriate. Like, they should have just cut up a few plays and said, these are the big corrections we need to make as a team, and then thrown the rest of it away. But knowing Bill, they watched the tape, and everybody feels like hell right now. They all feel terrible, and now they're going to go out there looking like they're feeling terrible.
Yeah. So, again, I don't know if they're going to do it, but 12.5 points against a team that's coming off a really embarrassing loss feels like that could be ripe for at least covering the points here with Charlotte. It's time for our favorite segment. We haven't done this in a while. WTF on RTF, which is, listen, there's always crazy and dumb moments in college football. There were some contenders, but we decided we had to shout out our crazy and dumb selves here. This is when Chris Sims made us do smelling salts after our show this weekend.
I got smelling salts. Ooh, these are illegal in the NFL now. All right, so be careful. All right.
Oh my God! Yeah. I've never.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
Well, come on, Ahmed, you can do it.
You're going pretty close to.
It's not a linebacker.
What is that?
Yeah, what is
Does
it?
a smelling salt.
It's ammonia.
Oh my God!
That is ridiculous.
Okay, get away.
Now you know why they're crazy.
Joshua, very into the smells. That was one of my takeaways. Also, I'd never done them before. They really are strong. It really does hit you. I see how it works. But you were like, it was like a little bit, I don't know, addiction. It felt like, like an addict getting a fix.
Not addict. I mean, I'm telling you how linebackers did it. We were probably a little bit overboard, but you got to wake up one way or another. And so it's nothing at this point.
All right. So we'll be on the lookout each week. There's going to be some contenders. Like, I kind of think your guy, Eddie George, Bowling Green has the cat on their sideline. Like, that's going to be a contender for RTF at least one, or WTF and RTF at least one of these weeks. So there's a lot. Send us the craziness. Send us the dumb moments of college
We love
football,
it.
and we will highlight them on this pod. Again, we are here on Saturday nights. We're going to have Saturday Night Live reaction shows. Some of the games may not be done by that point. So again, we'll just wrap it up on our midweek show. But we're really excited to spend some time together on Saturday nights, trying to make sense of the day that was in college football. You're getting Rushing the Field twice a week now, Rushing the Field, presented by Xfinity. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach, and we will see you after week 2 action wraps up.